Good day. Welcome to another edition of Ibima Mungo's Perspective on Global Affairs. Before I continue, I urge you to please press the like button. And if you are new to my show, I also urge you to subscribe. I have a question, but before I ask my question, I want to tell a little story. I've always told viewers on my channel that I love the Ottoman Empire. I have read extensively about the Ottoman Empire, and there's one particular sultan who was very, very let's just say he liked to drink. And because he liked alcohol, he's not supposed to have done that because he's a Muslim, but he did. And on the strength of that personal foible, he did something very, very consequential. He invaded a country called Cyprus. It so turned out that Cyprus has a lot of vineyards at that time. And it was for that reason that many people, historians, tended to think that it was not necessarily a strategic move, but a move to get hold of the vineyards of Cyprus. Over time, we've come to see that sometimes politicians face domestic problems, and due to their leaning or their particular considerations, they make very consequential decisions. I've always said that the Ukraine war was started by Biden because he energized and focused all of Europe to buy into his personal animus and hatred for Putin. And we also saw how Boris Johnson, very embattled, he was almost losing his prime ministership because of his diligence and his activities when he was during COVID. And what did he do? He tried to distract from that domestic challenge, and he ran to Ukraine and urged them to continue with this war, a very consequential war that has been very inimical to the well-being of Ukraine ever since. Now we have a situation where an American president is facing serious domestic problems, one that won't go away, and that is the Epstein files. And today we got to hear something very, very serious from no less a person than the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. He says that they're about to start a war. He frames this war as a war against narco-terrorists, but everybody knows that it's a veiled attempt at regime change in Venezuela. So my question today is, do you think President Trump will go all in and try to remove Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela? That is the question. Do you think President Trump will launch an attack on Venezuela? And will it be for the reasons he states, or will it be for some other reason? Anyway, today there's been, just before I got into this show, I got to find out that Ukraine, Kyiv particularly, is suffering massive bombing, massive attack by Geran drones, massive attack by Caliber missiles, massive attack by Iskander missiles. And why is this so? We've not gotten information yet. The attack possibly could be ongoing as I'm making this video, but it is nevertheless a very heavy attack, and many on social media, especially Twitter and Telegram channels, have already said that a lot of bombs are exploding, a lot of Garand troops are flying over Ukraine and Kiev particularly, and many other destinations within Ukraine. There's a swarm of Garand too, but no less. There's also consequential and very heavy bomb explosions being heard because of caliber. Some people even filmed the caliber being shot out of submarines in the Black Sea. But why is this happening? Why is this happening? Ukraine has been very effective in damaging Russia in the past few days. Ukraine has somehow found a way to bring pain to the Russians in Crimea and in all the cities that border Ukraine and Russia, but even then, some are very far off. Yesterday, I talked about an explosion in an oil dump 1,500 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. It really is a tribute to the Ukrainians that they are also developing their own capacity, no less, no doubt, with the effective help in targeting by the Europeans. We know that the CIA and the MI5, MI6 is very invested in this war, and they are helping the Ukraine to keep the Ukrainians in the fight. It is expected that the Ukrainians should hold the fort for the Western Alliance as they get ready and prepare themselves, build their capacity so that hopefully in 3 years' time they will be able to take on the Russians as they see it. That's what we have been hearing the Polish Prime Minister say, and that's what we've been hearing all the leadership of the military in countries like Germany and France and even England. So I have visuals here of some of the things going on here now. This first one here, this is how it's sounding now in Kiev. In Kiev, it's just you don't need the visuals. I guess the person filming this thing is hiding under a bed somewhere. But there's also, oh, I didn't share it particularly. Okay, let me share it. Sorry, that was a mistake on my part. Yes, like I said, the visuals are very revelatory. They tell me what is going on there. And whoever is filming it must have been hiding somewhere. But also there's another video of what the Ukrainians have done to the Russians, just as this is going on right now in the city called, in the Black Sea city called Novorossiysk. This is going on there now, an explosion. It is thought that this is being done with Flamingo missiles. The Ukrainians have been talking about Flamingo missiles for a while now, and it seems like they really have produced it. Like they said, they produced it with the help of of um, Western electronics, and this obviously was filmed by somebody. It really did hit and create a big impact. So the two belligerents are really getting at it, and it is obviously not an easy one for the people in Kiev, because obviously the Russians have by far more capacity. They flood the skies of Kiev with their guaranteed drones. When I have a report here that says a heavy night for Ukraine, explosion and fires in Chuhuiv and Cherkasky, more than 120 drones attacking. The target is Kiev. The fleet strikes with Caliber missiles, launch of Caliber missiles from the sea, at least 6 rockets. Explosions are currently booming in Kharkiv, Chuhuiv, at least 12, and Cherkasky. So it's just a night of hit me, I hit you. But obviously the Russians have more capacity than the Ukrainians, and it is telling. It is telling. There are other videos that are also showing Ukraine, Kiev in darkness. Like Kiev has been suffering from energy crisis, as we know. The Russians have been hitting their energy capacity, and they've destroyed many substations. In fact, one of the observers there, because they have a lot of military bloggers within this, covering this war. This war is giving credence to a lot of citizen journalists. And one was saying that the recent attack on a dam in Belgorod may be meaning that there's a capacity of the Russians to destroy the Kiev dam. I saw a photo of that Kiev dam, beautiful place, beautiful dam, and it would be a crying shame. In fact, I heard a hardliner in one of the, I think in parliament, saying that that they should flood Kiev, destroy that dam. Some people are really, really getting hard. In fact, it is thought now that the views in Russia is getting so far right and so hardened that it is becoming a problem for President Putin to continue to hold off this strong views of the people that who want more harm to be done. As Ukraine is facing this challenge by Russia, they also have another challenge too. Merz is having a big problem in his country. The German, one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine, the German chancellor called President Zelensky today and told him about something that just happened. We saw how a lot of young Ukrainian men are showing up. The Germans announced today that they will have to stop giving preferential treatment to Ukrainian refugees. They will now be treated like every other refugee and be paid a common sum. They had been enjoying privilege, whether they had a job or not. They enjoyed a privilege, and that means that they got more money. But Merz today called and he said, in a call, I asked Ukrainian president to ensure that young Ukrainian men do not return to Germany in growing numbers, but serve in their own country where they are needed. In other words, we're done with having more Ukrainian refugees. Ukrainian refugees are being pushed back now by even Poland. The most welcoming of all the countries are now beginning to know that there's a cost to it. And Germany is cutting on social services because they are now focusing on using most of their money in their rearmament. We already hear today that Germany is reinstating mandatory conscription for 18-year-old men, and they are required to report for military examination. They will be conscripted forcefully if over 200,000, which is the required sum announced by the minister Pistorius, if they don't get that amount of 200,000, then they'll voluntarily conscript, they'll compulsorily conscript some German youths, 18 to 22. So this is what's going on here now. So Zelensky did say that he spoke with Merz. He was very diplomatic in his talk about his speech with Merz, his call with Merz. So I'm grateful to Germany for its support since the start of the full-scale war. German assistance has saved thousands of our people's lives. We particularly value their help with air defense systems, military package, and support for our resilience. We heard just a few days ago, Zelensky was celebrating the fact that Germany sent them 2 Patriot missile batteries. And this call by Merz, it's obviously coming at the heels of the fact that he is losing a lot of popularity. The AFD, the anti-immigration party, very nationalist, very far-right. They call them far-right, but their views are nationalist. They hold very strong anti-war views, and in that regard, they are gaining popularity. And it is making Merz sometimes to take this kind of action. So he has called Zelensky to tell him that he should hold his young people. Yes, Zelensky opened the flood for Ukrainian youths to leave recently. He opened up the border and over 100,000 people took the opportunity and left. But if you think that is Zelensky's biggest problem, it is not. It is how to balance the budget for the coming year. And even the European Union recognizes that this is a problem. European Commissioner Vladis Dombrovskis warned taxpayers that you will have to open your wallets for Ukraine if Russia assets are not seized. This determination to seize Russian assets is one that is driving the whole of Europe crazy. Kaja Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, they're all very intent on trying to get that money. And now, if they don't get that money, knowing that they can't leave Ukraine alone in this winter with shortages in energy, shortages in gas, shortages in a lot of things, they may have to find a way. In fact, there was an interview recently where President Zelensky was asked if there's a plan B. And he says there's no plan B, but the Europeans will have to start thinking about plan B. So this European commissioner said, we discuss alternative options, including funding a compensation loan to Ukraine at the expense of European Union funds, which means the EU countries will cover the loan's interest until it is repaid. The other option is to grant Ukraine the same level of support as direct grants, that is paying your own money without return, which will result in significant direct expenses to EU countries. This is why Viktor Orban has said that he is not going to allow Hungarian money to be used by the EU. He says there are so many, in fact, he announced a raft of social benefits that he wants to use the money for the Hungarian people. Viktor Orban, we should know, is nationalist. He's anti-immigration. He riled very heavily against a new immigration policy that has just been done by the EU. You know, Zelensky had an interview with Bloomberg, and he was very prayerful. Zelensky hopes God will help to get the funds. He believes God will help him to get the funds of Russia. It is very important to him. He says Russia started the war and Russia should pay. But we should know that this is just money that will carry Ukraine through 2 years or 3 years. Most of it will be spent on military armament. If a little will go into pensions and administration of Ukraine. And in the face of corruption now, so much of it will also go into some people's pocket. So he says, I hope with God's help, we will make this decision. Zelensky, in an interview, will ask for help from higher powers in stealing Russian assets. Otherwise, we'll have to look for an alternative. This is a matter of our survival, so we really need this, and I count on our partners. So he's talking about this same frozon assets. So it was challenged very seriously by the reporter if there had been an alternative. And now we're seeing that the European Union has finally come to the point where they are coming to the realization that the pushback by Belgium and some other countries, not only Belgium, but there are some other countries standing behind who, no less the three countries of Hungary, Slovakia, and Czech Republic, who also oppose unilateral seizure of Russian assets. Quite a lot of countries. Even the ones who are very belligerent against the Russians, like Italy, still don't support this action. But you will be surprised that one person who has pushed back. Jens Stoltenberg was one of the people who pushed Ukraine into starting this war. They assured him of Russia cover. We learned how Jens Stoltenberg was talking about the early days of the war when the Russians were bombing Kyiv or attacking Kyiv. Zelensky reached out and said that there should be no-fly zone imposed by NATO over Ukraine. He said he pushed back, he didn't agree to it, and other alternatives had to be given because giving a no-fly zone against Russia in Ukraine will mean that NATO was ready to start a war with NATO, with Russia. No doubt the Ukrainians will very much want NATO to come and carry most of the weight and the load. They want NATO to take this war upon themselves. But NATO have seen that they're not ready. The Western politicians have pushed Ukraine into this war. They have made them use their bodies. They are losing their people. And what they're just doing is that they're giving their arms to continue the fight, as President Putin has said to the last Ukrainian. So today we got information that while Ukraine is very desperately looking for money. Some politicians in Norway were now proposing that they should use their sovereign wealth fund to guarantee. I should point out that Norway has profited very enormously from this war. They are very rich in oil and gas. They have a sovereign wealth fund that was, I think, 1.5 trillion and dollars equivalent. But now, at last count, it has grown very healthily and very robustly into being 2 trillion. They were celebrating its milestone 2 trillion the other day. But Jens Stoltenberg is not so touched by the Ukrainian situation to the extent of allowing Norway's sovereign wealth fund to be used to guarantee the loan. Stoltenberg rejects Norway's sovereign wealth fund to guarantee EU loan to Ukraine. He said the country is not an EU member, but is making significant financial contributions to Ukraine. According to him, Norway could participate in EU's plan to provide a loan to Ukraine. There were some ideas that Norway should guarantee the entire 159 billion, but that is not an option. This is exactly what President John Meanhwhile said. He says they are going to lead Ukraine down the primrose path, and they have led them down the primrose path. And Ukraine is now suffering the consequences of it. But President Zelensky has been busy. Before he made that call with Frederick Miles, he went to visit the city of Zaporozhye. The city of Zaporozhye is hearing quite a lot of artillery sound these days because the Russians are moving in from the east and they're getting closer. But he visited Zaporozhye today, and it was one where he stated this. This is what he said when he went to visit Zaporozhye. He put out a tweet about it, and this is what the tweet said. He said, "Oh, sorry, this is not the one I had in mind." We'll get to that story. I'm moving ahead of myself, but but indeed, he did visit Zaporozhye, and I was trying to get the visuals of his visit to Zaporozhye. Mm-hmm. I finally got it here. So he visited Zaporozhye and he met with a lot of people. He met with the people, the kids. He went to schools. These schools are under bunkers. Met with kids who are learning under very strenuous work conditions, conditions that have been imposed on them. They have no hand in the decision making that brings this war to them. And he had a good time. This is a very good propaganda picture, very good. It's father of all. It's highly loved by his people. That's what the picture says. This is a picture that the BBC will very much love to put in front, or New York Times and Le Monde and all the Western press would love to put in front of their channels. But he also met some veterans, the ones who are coming face to face with the reality of the war. They are the ones who have been taking the blows from the drones and the artillery of the Russians. He met with some of them recuperating in the hospitals and eventually met with some military leaders and all. So he's keeping himself busy in his role as the wartime leader of his country. But despite that visit to Zaporizhia, the news in the battlefield is not particularly a good one. Because right there in Zaporozhye, there's a city, there's a town called Heliopole, and it is being encircled slowly. The Russians have moved. We saw how they moved from Nove. They moved all the way from all the places they just occupied, some of the, and they are now moving westwards, moving at a very rapid rate because they don't get the kind of resistance that they ordinarily will get in big city, fortified cities. So they're just moving at a pace that is astonishing to those who do the mapping. Sometimes they question how the Russians moved that fast. But no doubt about it, most of the mapping agencies are talking about how Russian forces have now physically cut the northern supply line into Heliopole. Russian units have advanced 3 kilometers, captured the settlement of Danilivka. This town connects the city of Heliopole with Petrovsk via highway. So they have also liberated Rovnopilia and Yablokove. These are announced by the Ministry of Defense. It is not as if it's listen. Their pace is very fast. The Syriac map reported that there was a big success for the Ukrainians in the Minograd region. All the attack that had been going on in Rebuke from the north and the northeast was very successful, at least in unblocking some parts of the Minograd encirclement to the point where some Ukrainians were able to escape. Those ones who had run away from Pokrovsk and moved to Minograd and joined the vast amount of. So Ukrainian counter attack in Shakovskoy and resistance in Minograd paid off. Hundreds of Ukrainian troops escaped encirclement in that city, which is now in the verge of being completed following the further Russian advances south of Rodinsky during the last hours. Of course, and sadly, there are troops who will not make it out. Possibly, they will not survive. So that's what Syriac says. Syriac also says that in the Konstantinovka position, the situation in the Russian army continues securing new territories, new areas in the outskirts of Konstantinovka, including a series of trenches along the railway, the northeast of Ivanopia, as well as south of Prechetny. Same thing too in Volchansk. Generally, things are just going the way of the Russians. The Ukrainians are in their back foot. They are losing their biggest fortified cities. They are getting close to the two major cities that are still left, Seversk and Konstantinovka. Thus, the war will soon get into them. Kupiansk too is being encircled. They are strangulating them. The news is closing in slowly, and the Russians are putting more and more on the pedal, pressure on the pedal and step. There already we see how very effective. I just was watching a complete rundown of what the Rubicon group is now. Now they are being integrated into the complete arms of the strategy of the Russians. They are now a part of the Russian fighting force. the drone unit. So every unit now has drone operators in their distance. Well, let's go to the story that I was talking about. The Pete Hegseth put out a tweet, and that tweet is very ominous, very, very ominous. Let me now get to that tweet. It's a very ominous tweet. It says, yes. So here's what he said. He said, President Trump ordered action and the Department of War is delivering. Today, I'm announcing Operation Southern Spare, led by Joint Task Force Southern Spare and Southcom. This mission defends our homeland, removes narco-terrorists from our hemisphere, and secures our homeland from drugs that are killing our people, and the Western Hemisphere is America's neighborhood. We will protect it. It seems like the decision has been made to invade, attack, or somehow have a campaign in Venezuela. Venezuela, many people have been saying it's not necessarily a cheap one. You know, they have many unintended consequences when these things happen. We saw how Obama's very good support for the people of Libya has left that neighborhood destroyed for over 10 years. Not only Libya has been destroyed, but the whole of the Sahel and even northern Nigeria has been destroyed. We never saw it coming. The bombing in Syria led to activities that ultimately led to the collapse of the Syrian state. That would seem to have favored the Americans, but it took 10 years, and it meant that Syria is now, to a large extent, in the hands of the Turks, not necessarily the Americans. And Israel has moved in. So there are so many unintended consequences when these kind of things happen. We know many people think that it's regime change. President Trump does not like the Nicolas Maduro, tried to replace him with Juan Guaido in the first term. They tried to do a people's revolution to replace him. He did not succeed. They are now moving and using a new battering ram in the form of an opposition person who was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado. So we see this as the possibility of a war, despite the fact that Maduro has tried to make peace, using back channels, has tried to reach President Trump and said, if it's the oil you want, come and take. Venezuela has the world's largest reserves of oil. It's not Saudi Arabia. It's not Russia. And at this point in time, it's not America, it's Venezuela, the largest reserves of oil in the world. And it is, unfortunately, also, it is the fuel, the oil that most American refineries have been designed to process. The big news of the day, though, is China versus Japan. The Kakafa would not have not heard for a long time. Japan defeated China in the Sino-Japanese War of 1894, I think 1895. And that war was when China was weak and Japan was an imperialist nation expanding. It occupied China for a long time, very long time, till 1931. And then they had an excuse to increase that. In 1931, they invaded. Then they had an excuse to increase their invasion, to get more parts of Manchuria because they needed resources of the Chinese. And in 1937 also, they started a war. Ultimately, that war led to the death of almost 30 million Chinese. The Chinese never forget it. And in that time also, they lost Taiwan, Formosa, to the Japanese. The Japanese have a history with Taiwan. And the Japanese Prime Minister, Sanya Takachi, made a statement about Taiwan recently in the parliament. And she said a Chinese attack on Taiwan could be a survival-threatening situation for Japan because of the Taiwanese Strait. That's where China will now practically own the whole place and call it their own sovereign country, and they may interfere with countries that want to pass that neighborhood. That's what the Americans and that's what the Japanese and that's what most of the countries in that neighborhood fear, that if China takes it, they may not have access to the international waters. But whatever it is, they said, this particular statement has drawn the ire of the Chinese. The Chinese today put out a statement. They said, she said, Beijing heard this. If you invade Taiwan, Japan might fight. That is what they understood it as. And China made a very strong statement. If Japan intervenes militarily in Taiwan Strait situation, China will strike back decisively. It warns Japan not to play with fire on the Taiwan question. For those who play with fire will perish. This is a very serious matter. We know now that there's a mismatch between the capacity and the ability of the Japanese relative to the Chinese. The Chinese are now the preeminent military power within that neighborhood. All the American bases in Okinawa and all may not be able to save them. Japan is now racing to try and start to rearm, but it may not be good enough. Let me put a statement here. I think I have a statement of the foreign minister, the person in their foreign ministry, the spokesman of their foreign ministry, when he was making this statement regarding their response to Japan.
If Japan dares to intervene militarily in the Taiwan Strait situation, it will constitute an act of aggression and China will strike back decisively. China will firmly exercise its rights of self-defense granted by the UN Charter and international law and resolutely safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity. China warns Japan to deeply reflect on its historical crimes, immediately stop interfering in China's internal affairs, cease provocative actions, and not to play with fire on the Taiwan question, for those who play with fire will perish by it.
It's a very serious one because the Chinese have a very serious memory. They have historical memory of what the Japanese did to them. And the Japanese at this point are not particularly feeling very safe and comfortable. Not with a president like President Trump, who, if they need him, he will exert a lot from them. Already, he's shaking them down, telling them that they should come and invest $350 million in the $1 billion in the American economy to continue their protection. It is not something new. President Trump has always said it for a long time, for the course of over 30 years, that he doesn't see any reason why the Japanese and the Koreans and all these other countries should not be paying for their security. So this is not a time that the Japanese are very comfortable and confident that they can take on the Chinese. It is a very serious threat. And that is the biggest geopolitical statement today. The Chinese have not really necessarily been in a war in a long time, not since they fought a border war with Vietnam in 1979. But we now know that they have built weapon systems that are very formidable, very, very formidable. Anyway, this is where I end my show for today. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. If you have any comments regarding the views and opinions I just expressed, please put them in the comment section. Do well to like and share. Until my next video, you have a great day.